Okay, here I am again. Now, more on the Seattle area and what I think is going to happen. Okay, I was wrong. It wasn't Klondike, Olmsted Brothers Klondike. It was the Olmsted Brothers and the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition, which is a party. So it wasn't Klondike Party. It was Alaska Yukon Pacific Expo. Very interesting. The magnificent views will be by far the greatest features and will be vividly remembered when the best efforts of the architects and the landscape gardeners have been forgotten. The architecture of the exposition. We have decided to bring into association with us a group of Seattle men, and the question of getting up the design of the buildings in a wholly unfamiliar style as a work of collaboration, however you want to say that word, among a group of men whose individualities are necessarily more or less problematical, would seem a very serious one. Howard to Olmsted, 3/02/1907. I don't know what this means. Howard to Olmsted. Is that his middle name? Howard to? Or is this Howard to Olmsted? Is he talking to somebody? Or is that his middle name? Anyway. John C. Olmsted wanted to contrast the formal plantings with the beauty of the native landscape. The existing vegetation inspired him when he explored the future site of the exposition in 1906. Writing to his wife, he said, I went to the university grounds, that would be the University of Washington, and I walked over the part of the exposition is to occupy. So now we know the colleges have been around for a very, very long time. Who created all this? The people that came from England, that created the schools, that killed the Native Americans and Mexicans and enslaved the blacks. The growth is so dense, the land has never been cleaned up. Cleaned up? For what? Concrete? The little animals were living there. Most of the original timber was cut. That was for all the log cabins that the rich Dutch came over here and stole from the Duwamish tribe. Really from God, because timber produces oxygen. Without oxygen, we get cancer. But there are still some groves and scattering of original fir trees left. I suppose they were thought too small or of inferior quality to cut at the time that the lumbering was done, but there are still trees 3 to 4 feet in diameter, and a few even larger perhaps. They are tall and straight. A dense growth covers the ground, sometimes mostly young fir trees, maples, and others. The alders are pretty trees, and I saw some near the boathouse. Boathouse. They cut down trees to make boats, and then they cut down more trees to make a boathouse. It's no wonder we're all dying from emphysema. The alders are pretty trees, and I saw some near the boathouse with tall, straight, smooth trunks like forest beech trees, about 16 or 18 inches diameter. The undergrowth is extremely dense. The climate is so damp that everything grows luxuriantly. It's not that way anymore. It's a concrete jungle. 20 years ago, Seattle was beautiful when I got there, but it's not anymore. It's become like LA. It's a concrete jungle, and they're cutting down all the trees, and there's hardly any plants growing anywhere. Brake ferns are higher than my head. The salal rattles like starched linen. Salal rattles like starched linen when one walks through it. It is a low evergreen bush with big wide leaves, very handsome dark green. Olmsted to his wife. Contrary to his stepfather Frederick Law Olmsted Sr., who designed the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago, John C. Olmsted chose to use bright flowering perennials to contrast with rugged native Northwest vegetation, writing in a letter to his wife in April 1907, "I want to raise a lot of bright flowering perennial plants for the exhibition because they bloom, many of them, much larger than shrubs. They will give brilliancy of detail to the plantations." To the plantations? Are plantations where slaves are? "I place very little dependence on ordinary shade trees, nursery sizes being too small to be effective and big ones being too costly for the limited funds available." Olmsted relied on his partner, James Frederick Dawson, to manage much of the firm's work in Seattle. The landscape that the Olmsted Brothers firm produced for the AYP, or Alaska Yukon Pacific, was extraordinary in its volume, variety, and innovation, using over 2 million plants. The newspapers proclaimed its beauty. You got to cut down a tree to make a newspaper, because they don't recycle paper. And they don't use linen, and they don't use hemp. They use our beautiful shade trees. LA has no shade. The newspapers proclaimed its beauty, saying, "Most beautiful landscape garden effects at the AYP Fair." Fair. Fair. How fair was this for all the rich people? And art assists nature to make AYP most beautiful of expositions. A colorful palette of flowers drew the attention of fairgoers all summer as they enjoyed the magnificent setting of the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition on the grounds of the University of Washington. I guess that's how you get a college to grow, isn't it? John Galen Howard, supervising architect for the University of California, Berkeley, 1901 to 1922, and founder and director of its School of Architecture, was the supervising architect for the AYP. What's an architect? Somebody that builds up the matrix. After Olmsted's initial design for the grounds was approved by the UW Regents Howard began his work on the fair. Together they fine-tuned the AYP plan. Olmsted proposed using a Russian architectural style to harmonize with the spire-like fir trees remaining on the grounds. Howard expressed interest but was concerned that the other architects working on the fair would be unfamiliar with such a style and it would make collaboration difficult. Olmsted also suggested leaving the bases of the buildings plain so the buildings could appear to emerge out of a beautiful native landscape. How much longer are we going to continue to build up the matrix? Stop architecting everything. I'm tired. I want to breathe oxygen. Thank you.